I would assume if you're here, you are a parent or a grandparent or have some interest. How many of you, are we all parents or everybody? Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. So we're going to talk about we're going to get to really practical like tips and things, but we're going to start with kind of some big picture stuff. So go with me on that, if you will. I did want to start out, so you are promised something about postmodern in this, so in the title of the class. So we're going to do that. I will say this. There's not really a definition of postmodern. We're right in the middle of it. It's kind of shifting. It kind of changes. So here's the best I could come up with. We'll get to that. So just general, what are we talking about here? Postmoderns are skeptical about grand theories or ideologies. So, whether it's a religious identification or a political party or something like that, they easily shift between things like that, don't like to be locked down. They tend to be suspicious of centralized authority, the government, the police, the eldership, the bosses at work or whatever. They just tend they don't like to tend to respect people just because you have a name tag that says you're the boss or something. Now, by the way, let me say this. There are some good kind of things in here if you're kind of listening. It's not all good, but you're like, okay, yeah, it's kind of good to be a little suspicious about ideologies and kind of good to be a little suspicious about government and authority and stuff like that. So there's some good here. They will tend sometimes, I think it's good to say sometimes, to go with substance or style, they'll go with style over substance sometimes. And this is an Instagram, Snapchat, whatever generation how something looks, what filter you put on it, that matters a lot and sometimes more than the substance. Standards, this is what we think about a lot of times with postmodern. Standards tend to be subjective or relative. Situational. What works for you in your situation? That is kind of your truth, And so that's kind of part of postmodernism. And then the last one, this one is just really interesting, I think, to older people. It is that you can, and by the way, I just needed S's. I got 4 S's easily, and I really had to reach for the 5th S. So I don't know if satisfied is the best, but they're okay having beliefs that you might even say are contradictory, I am a big-time environmentalist, and I drive a Hummer. I am a Christian, but yeah, I'm living with my boyfriend or whatever. They really are okay with things that look inconsistent. They don't feel that tension. It's just kind of a postmodern thing. Again, craft your reality that works for you and go for it. It's kind of the way it works. So let me tell you a little story about my family, which I think will have some bearing on the rest of the class. So we went bowling about a month ago. My daughter was graduating from college, went up to Oklahoma City. We ended up at Main Event Bowling. I bowl about once every 5 years. I don't know. Probably, I'm looking at this group, and I'm going to spitball and say that's probably about right for this group. About once I don't see any professional bowlers in this group maybe. But, so that means I don't have real lofty goals for my bowling. Like score of 100, that's my goal. If I can break the century mark, which is really a pathetic goal, but for me it is like reaching the summit of Mount Everest, if I can break 100. We played 4 games, I hit 100 once, all right? So there we go. But I will say this, with bowling, it is very important that you have the correct equipment, right? Like you need to wear the bowling shoes. You don't show up at a bowling alley and strap on your ski boots and your skis. I would like to see it if you do. I think that would be great. Put that on YouTube. But you need to wear the right equipment. And you need, as with any kind of sport or activity, you kind of want to understand what are the rules of the game here. Are we shooting for a high score or is this golf? We want a low score. What are the rules? What are the parameters for the game? And when we talk about parenting or grandparenting, I want my children to know what's going on. I want them to be properly equipped for life here on earth as members of the kingdom of God, and I want them to understand the rules of the game. I want them to understand the reality that they inhabit. And so that's kind of what we're going to work with a little bit this afternoon as we talk something about worldviews. You could call this personal philosophies. You could call this outlooks or perspectives. I like worldviews. So we're going to talk a little bit about worldviews. Before we do that, I am a big breakfast cereal fan. And I think part of that is because my dad is a doctor, and so growing up, we couldn't have any good cereal at my house. It was like all bran, total, Raisin Bran. I had to go to other kids' house to get, whatever, magically delicious stuff or Cocoa Puffs or stuff like that. So that was me. But I will say I'm a big fan of Reese's Puffs, and recently, they still have the toys in the boxes or sometimes on the boxes. So they had this. This is Reese's Puffs recently. They have actual reality goggles, okay? So you cut the goggles out and then you wear the actual reality goggles. And I saw this and I was like, that is awesome, okay? So it's just like real life because it is, all right? And then they say instructions. Number 1, cut them out. Number 2, put them on. Number 3, get blown away. And so I think as a parent, this is what I want to help my kids do, is put on their actual reality glasses and see the world as it truly is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about worldviews and then hone in on a biblical worldview and then finish the class with some practical things you can just do for your kids or your grandkids. So every worldview, whether you're Christian, you're Muslim, you're an unbeliever, you're whatever, every worldview has 4 basic elements. The first element is the creation. Okay, let me get this up there. The creation. How did we get here? How did the world begin? Everybody has a story about that, okay? Like one super common answer to this question is, it just started, insert your word, randomly or by chance. I mean, there wasn't a design, there wasn't a blueprint. Nobody put this together. It just, 14.2 maybe billion years ago, pop, here we go. We're off to the races. But it's not, there wasn't a purpose behind the universe. That's a very, very common worldview, getting more common. So from this kind of pointless accident, over the millennia, we kind of crawled out of the soup and the rest of the animal kingdom emerged. And here we are today. The one major difference between us and, your parakeet or your pet lizard is we are at the top. Okay, we are the most evolved animals. In this worldview, the difference between us and the animal kingdom, we're just at the top of the pyramid there. And that's going to affect, if you're raising kids in this and they're hearing this worldview, like if you go with this worldview, it's going to affect the way you see yourself. It's going to affect the way you see other people, right? I mean, we're animals basically, and we're just here by chance. I mean, if we're just carbon-based machines, then we certainly don't have any obligations to God. There's no God in this worldview. And we really don't have any objective responsibilities to each other, to people we don't know, to strangers, and so the rules, the ethics, the morals, we've kind of come up with that as a society over time so that we can, not kill each other and we can kind of get along and make it through our 70, 80, 90 years as best we can. So that's basically one way of looking at the world, and that's why the creation story you tell matters. Then there's a biblical worldview, the biblical worldview, and you could get a lot of passages here to kind of frame this up, but I like Hebrews 3:4, which says, and I don't think I have a slide on this, so no, I don't. So Hebrews 3:4 says, every house is built by someone. Would you agree with that? Every house is built by someone. Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. So this is the biblical worldview. So if you're hiking in Colorado or in Northwest Arkansas or something, and you're way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, and you have no clue where you are, and you come across like a cottage. It's abandoned, it's run down, there's a hole in the roof, but there's a cottage, and it's got a little front porch and a fireplace, and there's an old rocking chair covered with cobwebs. You are naturally going to assume somebody built this. This didn't just, whoa, it just happened. And so our worldview, this Hebrews kind of 3 worldview, since we come across something infinitely, well, not infinitely, but much more complex in our planet and our universe, we're not going to assume this just happened. We're going to assume there's a builder, and the Bible says the builder is God. The builder of all things is God. So there is a mover behind the universe that we inhabit. And it's interesting, the biblical story, as Christians, as central as the gospel is to us, the biblical story does not start with John 3:16, does it? The biblical story doesn't start with Jesus died for our sins. It doesn't start with that. It starts with, in the beginning, God. And in the beginning, God created. It doesn't start with you, doesn't start with me, doesn't start with my kids. I am not at the center of the universe. My toddler, as much as they may think they are not at the center of the universe. And so parenting starts with helping them understand. In a way, the Bible diminishes us. It gives us a humble recognition of where we are in the story from verse 1. In the beginning, God. We come in a little bit later to the story, and so my kids need to understand. It's, the world doesn't revolve around you. The world revolves. You inhabit His world. He doesn't inhabit your world. You inhabit His world, and so we get this loving diminishment. I mean, it's just actual reality. It's His world, but it doesn't just diminish us. In the beginning, in the opening chapters of Genesis, the Bible also distinguishes us. It says not only is this God's world, but He did put His image in you, right? I mean, we're made in the image of God. And when God makes Adam, He breathes into Adam. And so that makes us special in the world. It makes us different in the world. We bear the image of God, imperfectly, but we bear the image of God. I've got a really sweet German shepherd named Jane. She is ancient. She is about 16 years old. So as German shepherds go, kind of Methuselah status, she's getting close to that. And I love my dog, and she loves us, but, she's never going to think about Genesis chapter 1. She's never going to write a blog about the meaning of life. She's not going to really ask these existential questions about worldview and stuff. She's a dog, all right? She's a very smart dog, but she's a dog. But we're made in the image of God, and so God, what does that mean practically? Well, God has emotions in the Bible. God has a mind. God has a will. He wills certain things to happen. It means that, and so we also have a mind. We have emotions. We have a will. We're not perfect like God is, but we do bear His image in those ways, and that separates us from the rest of the created world. It gives us a special place. So, the creation. How you think things began, that affects how you see the world. And how your children understand that part of the story, creation, will affect the way they encounter themselves and other people, and certainly God as well. Then every worldview has a story about the fall, okay? The fall, that's what is wrong with this place. I will say, there are a lot of things that people disagree on. We all agree on one thing: this place is jacked. I mean, this place is messed up. I mean, everybody agrees on that. So what is your worldview's story about how did we get here? How did this get messed up? And so the fall, what's wrong with the fall? Like if you think what's wrong with the world is ignorance, like if people just knew more, if people just had the right information, the world would be fixed. That's one. Or like equal distribution of resources. Like if everybody just had a universal salary, or just had access to good health care, or if we could just get then the problem would be solved. The problem is inequality there. So those are not bad things, by the way, fixing the education system or getting things more equal or whatever. Those are not bad things. But if your idea, we're talking about what is your idea with what's wrong, and people have different ideas about that. I'm going to ask you, I think this is a softball question, biblical worldview. What is wrong with the world according to a biblical worldview?
Satan is the ruler of this world.
Satan, the prince of this world, Jesus called him. Sin, for us also, as Satan gets this thing started, gets the ball rolling, and then we chose to rebel against God. And then, Paul comes along and he says in Romans 3, all have sinned. That's all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So Satan and sin, that is where we see the root cause of what's wrong with the world. Adam and Eve sinned. I sinned. You sinned. We've all sinned. All of humanity has rebelled against our Creator. And so we have entered into this weird relationship with the creation where we're kind of working against the creation in some ways. Sin has affected us. It's affected our relationships. It has affected the natural world as well. You remember what happened when God cursed Satan and God cursed Adam and Eve? It says in chapter 3 of Genesis, the ground is cursed because of you. Think about that, the ground. I mean, that's the natural world, the stuff of the world. Something happened, and theologians literally call this the fall. And so the world has never been the same since. I was just thinking, I'm not a very good gardener, but I have done some experimentation with some cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff in my backyard and everything, and it's hard, okay? Even for good gardeners. My dad is a good gardener. He puts a lot of work into that. He probably spends way more money getting those tomatoes out of the ground than if he just went to the supermarket. Of course, they taste better, I know, but I mean, there's a lot of work. Why is it so hard to grow a tomato? Like if it's too cold or too hot, the tomatoes have a problem. If a worm gets in there, the tomato's got a problem. I mean, why is it so hard? But it's not hard at all to grow weeds. I wonder sometimes, I don't have the answer. I wonder if before sin entered the world, if tomatoes grew just as easily as the weeds grew. Now, I wonder if their sin messed up gardening and everything else for us. I don't know. But their sin definitely infected the natural world. Godly parents help their children understand how we got here. Mommy, this is wrong. Mommy, that person... we take those and we say, here's how we got there. We're sinners. And this has infected our relationships. It's hurt our relationship with God. It's caused all of these problems in the world. And as we do that, we help our kids get to where they're not wearing snow skis at the bowling alley. I mean, we get them equipped for life here on earth. Every worldview also has a redemption story. So what's the solution? Everybody's got a solution. More education, better schools, better salaries for teachers. By the way, I agree with all that stuff. That's great. That'd be good. Better distribution of resources, higher minimum wage, lower minimum wage, I don't know, whatever. There's a solution. Better medicine. We need advancements in technology could solve the world's problems. Or the Bible, so we've got the problem of sin and Satan. What does the Bible say is the solution? That's always a good answer in Bible class, right? Jesus. You are correct. Jesus is the answer. The Bible is just, the answer is this person, Jesus Christ. And so because the biblical worldview points to Jesus as the solution, we have a different solution than the world, right? Okay? We do. And we're going to make some different decisions because of that. We're going to make some different choices. And our journey should look a little bit different than those who don't believe that Jesus is the solution. And that doesn't mean we don't need to fix the economy, we don't need to fix our schools, we don't need better health care. It doesn't mean any of that. It means the real problem underneath is this problem of sin that can only be addressed by the gospel, by the good news. And we want to help our kids and grandkids understand that, constantly pointing to that. And finally, restoration. What does it look like when it's fixed? Everybody has an idea. If the world were fixed, if you could reboot it, clean off whatever the virus is that you believe has infected the world, and you reboot it, what does it look like now? What does it look like? Where there's no poverty, where there's no disease, where everybody treats each other well, where people take care of the earth instead of polluting the earth, all of those kinds of things. And if we're going to be God's people, a community of faith, and we're going to do a good job of passing our faith, down to the next generation and the next generation, then we have to help our kids see the Bible is more than a source of inspiration. It's more than some tips. It's more than some good vibes to help them feel better about themselves. The Bible is actually a pair of actual reality glasses to help them see what's really going on. So that's what we want to do. So just for review, we'll go through this really quickly. A biblical worldview. I already talked through this, but I'll just read it, okay? So creation, biblical worldview, God made the universe. It's His, belongs to Him. That means we, inhabiting it, we belong to Him as well. We're made in His image. The fall, we live in conflict with God because of our sinful desires. They're pulling us away. They're creating a separation, a redemption. The gap between God and man could only be bridged by the God-man. There's been exactly one in human history, Jesus. 100% God, 100% man, the only one who could bridge that gap, the God-man Jesus. And then restoration, this is what we're hoping for. This is what we sing about on Sundays. This is what we long for. God is going to inaugurate this glorious future. It's already started, but it's not all the way installed, yes? God will inaugurate this glorious future where Christ has judged sin and evil, and the world is purged of all of that once and for all. And that is what we're excited about. Revelation 21:1 calls it a new heaven and a new earth. Reboot, right? So when things don't go well, let me rephrase that. Things won't go well for my kids or my grandkids unless their worldview matches up with the facts on the ground, with actual reality. And so that's why we need to do a good job of helping them develop these 4 points and seeing them and taking from their favorite TV show to stuff on the news to people they're following on Instagram, helping them see, how does this fit into this worldview? What's this person's worldview? And ask these questions. So before we get into the more kind of like everyday practical stuff, let's just pause for a second and see if y'all, any questions about worldview stuff? Secular worldview, Christian worldview. Was it so utterly confusing you don't even know what question to ask? I hope not.
Well, I know what questions they ask. They're questions that we never ask ourselves.
Mm.
And that is the Bible really true?
Mm-hmm.
Does the Bible contain things
Mm-hmm.
that are not only fictional, but just morally
Mm-hmm.
wrong?
Morally sketchy?
It's misogynistic, it's violent,
Mm-hmm.
it's homophobic.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of things.
Yep. And that's another class. Those are all big questions,
Yeah,
and we need to be
we
ready
don't
to deal
ask
with those.
ourselves these questions, except that those questions are presented to our young people in school,
Mm-hmm.
in high school and in
Mm-hmm.
college especially.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that we really prepare them for those questions.
And John, that is great because hiding those questions for them or dodging those questions is probably not the most helpful approach, because if they haven't thought those questions or been asking those questions, they will at some point. And so that's probably, like I said, you're getting into some apologetic stuff there, and that's another thing I would love to talk about as well. But for our start, this is kind of what we're talking about as far as reality. Of course, with a lot of those, you want to say, is the Bible really homophobic? Is the Bible really misogynistic? Because a lot of times you get some salad shooter kind of using of text and manipulation of text to say, well, God approves genocide or God approves this. And those are big questions, but does He really? And those are things that can be tackled and should be tackled. And I think it's okay for them to ask those questions. We want them asking those questions to us rather than asking those questions to their whoever, friends at school, or putting it out there on Instagram or whatever. Other things about worldview stuff. All right, let's go. Let's go. If we don't get the big picture down, then we're not really helping them navigate according to reality. If they don't have true north, then they're going to be disoriented, right? So this is something I figure we're in Texas, so, and this may be a little awkward at a Church of Christ gathering, but line dancing, okay? Texas line dancing, go with me on that. I'm a horrible dancer, so I'm not advocating this. I'm certainly not advocating that anyone would ever see me line dancing. But parenting, for a long time, I'm just going to be confessional here. For a long time, I thought Christian parenting, okay? as opposed to like non-Christian parenting, was all about the lines, okay? Where are the lines? Let's draw those. G-rated, okay, or they're this age, maybe PG, PG-13. Are these lyrics in this song okay? We've actually asked questions in our house. Is this or is this not a cuss word? You know, I mean, if it starts with an S, yes. If it starts with a C, no. If it, I don't know. We get into all these things. You guys are wondering what words I'm talking about, but I mean, is this okay? Is this so? A lot of line dancing as far as parents. Christian parenting is primarily about nailing down the lines. Is the skirt, how many inches above the knees does it need to be a Christian skirt? As if there is such a thing as a Christian skirt. Okay, but those are questions. Or how many hours, now, how many hours a day of screen time, right? Is a Christian parent, it's an hour a day or 2 hours a day. I mean, and so we get really focused on the lines, and those are not bad questions to ask. But again, I think we want to go deeper and help them have the tool chest to navigate life on their own, because the day is going to be coming when we're not going to be there to draw lines and talk about all that stuff, but we need them to be able to draw their own lines and make their own decisions. So often accompanying this, there's a particular way of using Scripture as well, which is moral nuggets, or here's a verse to help you. And I mean, but what's the big picture? What's the big picture? That's where I really want us to say this is primary. Christian parenting is painting this worldview. It's painting this worldview. Is God really just my tool as a parent to get my kids to act better? No, not primarily to get my kid. Is it a behavior management tool? That's not primarily what the Bible is. Is it primarily a way to augment their self-esteem? Not primarily. It is a picture of reality. And I think we get this back in the Pentateuch when God is talking about, okay, what do we do with the Scriptures specifically related to the next generation? So here you go. This is a familiar passage, I think. Should be, fix these words of mine. I'm the author of reality. So fix these in your hearts and on your minds. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children. Talking about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your houses, on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that the Lord swore to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. So I would summarize this by saying, God is saying, this worldview, this view of reality, every place, every time, every situation, talk about it. Ask the questions. Draw them out on this. I mean, you're getting up in the morning, breakfast table, talk about it. You're going down, you're in the minivan coming home from soccer practice. Talk about this. Fix this in their minds. They're going to have a worldview. Will it be a biblical worldview? And I would ask you guys, this is maybe more of a rhetorical question, what percentage of people at your church have a biblical worldview? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. Not 100% to be sure. So help them develop that. And we all want them. This is probably another class, so I'm just going to do a footnote here, and we can put this on for next year at this conference. I think it would be interesting to talk about what are our idols as parents. And I would suggest and by the way, idols are usually a good thing that becomes a God thing. Okay, there you go. I would say that one of our idols as parents today is the idol of safety. I am primarily concerned with giving my kids a safe environment. Now, what I said, if it's a good idol, I mean, if it's an idol that's really holding today, then it probably sounds kind of true. But is that a primary concern? It's a big concern. It's an important concern. I certainly want my kids to be safe. But this world is not safe, is it? It's not safe for them now. It's certainly not going to be safe when they get out of my house. So if I'm promoting safety as the primary concern, I'm going to grow up with kids that's their primary concern. I would ask you this, for Christians, how about New Testament? How safe was the world for those apostles? How safe was the world for those who professed faith in Jesus Christ as you work through the Acts of the Apostles, or you read the last part of Hebrews chapter 11? Not very. Safety is important. I want to keep my kids safe. My primary concern is for them to be disciples. And that may take them. My daughter just started working at this sex trafficking nonprofit. I don't suspect that's the most safe place she could be with. Maybe not the safest people she could be with, but I'm very proud of her. And so we just want to see them get launched into the world as disciples, as light in a dark world. And so practical tips. And then we'll stop for some questions and comments here. Just some practical tips. And this is not a comprehensive list at all, but I'm just thinking worldview. How do we work on that? One thing would be understand that just because entertainment is clean does not make it Christian. And this kind of goes back to the line dancing, like how many curse words are in this TV show, or what's this character all about, or there's violence here. And those are not bad questions, but something being clean does not necessarily mean it's Christian, right? Like there are very unchristian worldviews behind some very clean shows. Now, I'm going to date myself here, and honestly, this show kind of predates me. How about I Love Lucy? All right. Hopefully most of you know what I love. It was a comedy. Lucille Ball, hilarious. Loved it. Still like to watch these shows. It's clean. There aren't curse words in there, and she's not stabbing anybody or decapitating anybody, generally, that I can remember. But it's not Christian. Jesus fundamentally defines himself as a servant. Was Lucy a servant in that show? Well, she was a servant of herself, I guess. Is God at the center of her universe? No, she's at the center of her universe in the TV show. And it was all about her becoming famous like her husband. Her husband was saying, I'm going to be famous too. And so she's always trying to trick and manipulate Ricky. And that's the comedy of the show, right? But definitely not a Christian worldview that this show is operating with. I mean, you can ask the same things about, Castaway or NCIS or this book by Smith that I have under the book recommendations. He walks through a bunch of shows that are more contemporary than I Love Lucy. And he even talks about the Dallas Cowboys. So if you're a Cowboys fan, what is a worldview to a Dallas Cowboys fan? He walks through what that looks like. And just making a distinction between the clean versus the actual Christian worldview that we've been talking about. The second thing is, so we're supposed to do the bubble or whatever and can't watch any of these shows. It's clean, but it's not Christian. No, that's not what we're saying. We're actually saying use secular stories, use secular entertainment to teach. Use it to ask questions. I mean, Phil talked about using commercials this morning. That was kind of interesting. I like that. Where do these stories fit with a biblical worldview? Where does this story diverge from a biblical? How do you think this character would have acted differently if this character was a disciple of Christ? Or, what is the assumption here about what the fix is? What is the solution to the world's problems? What does this cartoon or what does this show say about that? And then this one's really, I guess just to be intentional about would be, these are supposed to be popping up behind me, but that's my job. I'm not used to handling the clicker on my own. Okay, make your joy in Christ visible to your children. Don't just talk about joy. Hey, let's memorize the fruits of the Spirit. Let's show a little joy. Let's get excited about Jesus, right? I mean, we get excited about other things. How about getting excited about the Lord and letting them see that is where our joy comes from? This one I do want to spend a little bit of time on. I think this is a big deal. And it's telling real stories about real people. I mean, they can be historical figures or whatever, but even better would be real people that they know who are courageously living for God, who are making sacrifices, who've moved out of the safe zone because of their faith in God. A friend with cancer. Your school friend's mom that has cancer, or a missionary couple who they were successful and now they sold everything and now they've moved to go plant a church or to go work in the inner city or to go do this or to feed the hungry off in this place, or the woman who runs the soup kitchen, the person who gave a generous financial gift to help the mission program. I mean, really, what could they have done with that money? Think of all the things they could have done for them. Could have had a swimming pool or could have gone on a vacation, but why did they gave it to the missions program of the church? And I was thinking, here's one right now that's very much on my mind, and I'm sharing this story with my kids, even though they're kind of adult kids now. But At Prestoncrest, and by the way, I'm going to shorten this story down because there are a lot of really cool God elements to this story, but we're going to kind of jump in. We have an Iranian couple at our church. Young, they have twin sons that are about 6 months old, and then they've got a real firecracker of a son who's about 4 years old. They're Iranian, and how they got to Prestoncrest, that's a God story, another time. Really cool, though. So they really just kind of walk in our building at one point, but God was behind that. So now they're at Prestoncrest. Now they're members of Prestoncrest. Nathan and Masa. Turns out they're here as refugees, okay? He had been arrested multiple times in Iran because he's a Christian. And he was getting questioned, and he led house churches in Iran. And she also comes from this, her family were Christian, and so they were persecuted, and they had to get out of Iran or get locked up. So anyways, now they lead 15 house churches in Iran from their little apartment in North Dallas. They get on FaceTime, and they're meeting with these people, and they're leading baptismal services, and they're teaching, and they're worshiping together, and they are pretty amazing. I was over at their house a few weeks ago, and we eat dinner, and then his phone FaceTimes, and he's like, hey, I got a guy from Iran. We really need to pray with these people. I'm going to have them call back in 10 minutes. Can we do that? And can you guys pray with them too? I was like, yeah, for sure. So then we FaceTime, and I can literally see this couple sitting somewhere in Iran, Christians, and they've got this little baby, and they're probably 40-ish, but they have a little baby that they just adopted. And the Iranian government has now told them, we're going to come get the baby at some point because we didn't know you were Christians when you started the adoption process. Christians can't adopt babies in Iran. So we were praying with these people on FaceTime and watching Nathan and Masa, and this couple is crying over there in Iran, and they got the little baby there, and it's just very heart-wrenching. I mean, but these are the stories I want my kids to hear about. I want my grandkids to hear about. These people are doing it. By the way, I put if you're friends of mine on Facebook, I linked. She put an article on Facebook. Her father just got arrested in Iran and sentenced to 3 years in prison for being a Christian. And I can't remember the exact charges, but he's a Christian. That's what the charges are. Basically, it would clear everything up if he would just renounce Jesus. So he will be in jail for 3 years, and I put that on Facebook. And speaking of safety, so I say, hey, Prestoncrest member, father got arrested in Iran, blah, blah, blah. I got a phone call, a voicemail message from a very well-meaning lady who's part of our church. I mean, sweet, awesome, wonderful lady. But she said, I feel like you're making us unsafe by sharing this and saying that they're Prestoncrest members. And so, okay, so she's like, can you take that down or whatever? And I see where she's coming from, but I'm like, there's a bigger story here. I mean, there's a bigger story. One of our brothers in Christ, who's a father of our church member, just got sentenced to prison. We got to talk about this. We got to pray about this. I mean, if we're any semblance of like the first century church, now they didn't have Facebook in the first century. That's my understanding. But this is exactly the kind of thing we need to say. And I don't know, maybe it is a little dangerous. I don't think it is because it wasn't an anti-Muslim article. It was just an article about his story, and he's just been sentenced to these years in school. But let's share these stories. Let's share these stories about people that our kids know and interact with who are living dangerously for Jesus. When is this class supposed to be over, by the way? 3 minutes, okay. We're getting there, we're getting there. And then for some reason, I think I left the last thing off. I really did a pretty terrible job with this PowerPoint presentation, but there is one more. Constantly, everywhere, in every way. This is kind of that Deuteronomy 17. Just look for opportunities to help them think biblically. And that's, again, there's a billboard by the side of the road, there's a TV show they're watching, there's a commercial, there's a whatever, and just say, hey, where's this, what worldview is this, and how can I help them, how can we talk about this instead of dodging it? Let's engage this and talk about it. So let's stop for questions here at the end, and then we definitely want to pray about this stuff before we go.